Picture this: a farmer in Nebraska. 500 acres of corn are ready to harvest. A machine worth $500,000 is sitting dead in the middle of the field. Not because the engine failed, not because a tire blew out, because a sensor threw an error code that only a John Deere authorized technician with a proprietary laptop and a USB cable is legally allowed to reset. The technician is 3 days away. The crop is rotting on the stalk. That machine is a John Deere, the same green and yellow icon that generations of American farming families treated like a member of the household. The brand with the leaping deer, the brand whose logo hung in garages across the heartland, the way sports pennants hang in a teenager's bedroom. This is the story of how one of the most beloved brands in American history decided that owning a product was no longer enough, that the people who built this country's food supply would become tenants in their own fields, renting permission to use what they had already paid for. This is not a story about tractors. It is a story about power, data, and who gets to decide what ownership actually means. John Deere was founded in 1837. That is not a typo. The company is nearly 2 centuries old, and for most of that history, its relationship with the American farmer was built on something genuine. John Deere, the man, was a blacksmith in Illinois who watched farmers struggling with cast-iron plows that clogged in the thick Midwestern soil. He built a steel plow that cut cleanly through it. He solved a real problem. That founding act of practical innovation became the company's entire identity for the next 150 years. By the mid-20th century, John Deere was not just a machinery brand, it was a generational covenant. Grandfathers handed down their Deere equipment to sons, who handed it down to grandchildren. The green paint and yellow trim were not a colour scheme, they were a family crest. Farmers in Iowa, Kansas and Missouri did not just buy John Deere equipment because it worked. They bought it because it was what their fathers trusted. John Deere controls 53% of the country's large tractor market. That is not market share. That is a cultural monopoly built over generations, and the company understood exactly what that loyalty was worth. The question was how to monetize it in ways that went far beyond steel and rubber. The answer came from an unlikely direction. Not from the heartland, from Silicon Valley. Around 2011 and 2012, Deere launched its John Deere Operations Center, a cloud platform that let farmers upload, visualize, and manage data from their equipment. Suddenly, the tractor was not just a machine. It was a sensor station sending data back to a central hub. That was the moment the company changed forever. The executives in Moline, Illinois had looked at what Apple did with the iPhone, what Adobe did with its software suite, and what Microsoft did with Office 365, and they saw the future clearly. Hardware is a one-time sale, software is a subscription, data is a recurring goldmine. In 2017, Deere acquired Blue River Technology, a Silicon Valley startup specializing in computer vision and machine learning, positioning itself as a frontrunner in precision agriculture. That acquisition was not about building a better sprayer. It was about building a better data pipeline. Analysts who follow John Deere have forecast that the precision agriculture division will drive 3/4 of the company's sales growth in the coming years. The tractor had become a Trojan horse. Every sensor, every GPS ping, every soil moisture reading flowing from a farmer's field into Deere's cloud servers was feeding an intelligence network that the farmer was paying to build and would never fully own. The machinery was the entry point. The data was the business. If this video is making you rethink how corporate strategy actually works, hit subscribe. We cover the capital moves that the mainstream financial press buries in footnotes. But here is what the farmers did not know. While they were out in the fields running this new software-driven equipment, John Deere's lawyers were quietly drafting the document that would redefine what it meant to own a tractor, a document most farmers signed without reading a single paragraph. In October 2015, John Deere rolled out a new end-user license agreement. It covered all equipment with embedded software, which by that point meant virtually every modern tractor the company sold. The agreement forbade nearly all repair and modification to farming equipment and prevented farmers from suing for crop loss, lost profits, loss of goodwill, or loss of use of equipment arising from the performance or non-performance of any aspect of the software. The agreement applied to anyone who turned the key or otherwise used a John Deere tractor with embedded software. Read that again. You buy a $500,000 machine, you sign a document. That document strips away your right to fix it. It strips away your right to hire someone else to fix it. And if the software fails during harvest and you lose your entire crop, Deere has already written the clause that says it is not responsible. You did not buy a tractor, you bought a license to operate a tractor. John Deere retained ownership of the software running inside it. The distinction sounds technical. The consequences were devastating. Independent mechanics who had been servicing farm equipment for decades suddenly found themselves legally blocked from touching Deere machinery. The tools to diagnose a software fault did not exist outside of authorized dealerships. A farmer 200 miles from the nearest dealer had no options, none that were legal anyway. The daily reality for American farmers became something that would be unthinkable in any other industry. John Deere's Service Advisor software controls every diagnostic function on modern tractors. Farmers cannot reset an error code without it, cannot calibrate sensors, and cannot change certain settings on equipment they bought outright. One Nebraska farmer put it plainly. He wanted to replace a transmission and took the tractor to an independent mechanic. The mechanic installed the new transmission, but the tractor could not drive out of the shop. Deere charges $230 plus $130 an hour for a technician to drive out and plug a connector into a USB port to authorize the part. A USB plug, $130 an hour. For the privilege of using a part you already purchased and installed yourself. A 2023 study by the US Public Interest Research Group found that American farmers lose $3 billion annually to equipment downtime and pay an additional $1.2 billion per year in excess repair costs as a result of having to rely on dealerships. Spring planting has a window measured in days, not weeks. Miss it, and you miss the season. One Missouri farmer reported that his fertilizer spreader sat at a John Deere dealership for 28 days before it was fixed. 28 days, an entire planting window, gone. John Deere had locked the repair market. But the company had not stopped there, because a locked repair market is only valuable if farmers have nowhere else to turn, so Deere went to work making certain they did not. The independent repair shop has been a fixture of rural American life for generations. A local mechanic who knew every piece of equipment in the county, who could be called on a Sunday morning during harvest, and who charged a fair rate because he lived in the same community as his customers. John Deere spent the better part of a decade systematically eliminating those shops. John Deere controls 53% of the country's large tractor market, and 82% of its 1,357 agricultural equipment. Dealership locations are part of large chains with 7 or more sites. 6 dealers now control roughly 40% of Deere's entire dealership network. Deere achieved this by pressuring small, single-location dealerships to consolidate or lose their franchise. If a dealer did not grow into a regional chain, they were cut off. The result is one John Deere dealership chain for every 12,018 farms and every 5.3 million acres of American farmland. In Montana, farmers can be required to travel hundreds of miles to reach the nearest competing dealership chain. The independent mechanic did not disappear because the market decided he was no longer needed. He disappeared because John Deere redesigned the market to make him irrelevant. Without access to the diagnostic software, without authorization codes, without the proprietary tools, the most skilled independent mechanic in the state was helpless. A corporate policy made expertise worthless overnight. Farmers had one choice: pay Deere's price, wait, Deere's timeline, or find another way. This is where the story takes a turn that no corporate communications team could have anticipated. To avoid the locks that John Deere puts on the tractors they buy, farmers throughout America's heartland started hacking their equipment with firmware cracked in Eastern Europe and traded on invite-only, paid online forums, not hypothetically, not occasionally, routinely. One Nebraska farmer said it plainly to investigators. What you've got is technicians running around here with cracked Ukrainian John Deere software that they bought off the black market. Think about what that sentence means. American food producers, the people feeding 330 million people, were being driven to purchase black market software from Eastern European hackers just to keep their legally purchased equipment running during harvest. The forums require an invitation to access and a payment to download. The farmers paid anyway, because the alternative was watching their crops die in the field while waiting for an authorized technician with a USB drive. In some cases, waiting for an authorized technician to make repairs could take days or even weeks, and the price for that technician was described as astronomical. John Deere had built something so restrictive, so punishing, that it pushed the backbone of American agriculture into the black market. And the story still gets worse from there. Because while all of this was happening, while the lawsuits were piling up and the farmers were downloading cracked firmware off the internet, John Deere was quietly running a second operation that had nothing to do with selling tractors and everything to do with something worth far more than steel. Every John Deere tractor connected to the operation center is a data collection device. GPS coordinates, soil composition readings, yield data, planting patterns, moisture levels, crop health metrics, and field-by-field performance over multiple seasons. This is some of the most valuable agronomic intelligence on Earth. Deere collects agronomic data, including crop management data, as well as machine operation data such as fuel level, location, machine hours, and engine RPM, creating an intricate ecosystem of data flows across machines, farmers, and John Deere. The farmer generates this data with his labour, his land, and his equipment. He pays for the equipment. He does the work. John Deere collects the output. Deere has opened this data platform to other software suppliers, creating an arrangement where third-party companies can access farmer data housed within the operations centre. The company frames this as a service, a way for farmers to gain insights and increase profits. But the farmer never consented to becoming a data supplier for the agricultural industry. He bought a tractor. The tractor came with software. The software came with terms. The terms transferred the data. Analysts have forecast that Deere's precision agriculture division will drive 3/4 of the company's sales growth going forward. That is not a machinery business. That is a data business that happens to sell machinery as the means of collection. The farmer pays for the device. He generates the data. He pays again to access it, and the company sells the intelligence derived from its own labour back into the market that it competes in. The legal reckoning arrived in waves. In 2022, a class action lawsuit was filed accusing John Deere of withholding repair software and conspiring with authorised dealers to force farmers to use their services, when farmers could otherwise fix their tractors themselves or use independent alternatives. Then the government stepped in. In January 2025, the FTC sued Deere, accusing the company of unfair practices that drove up equipment repair costs for farmers, while depriving them of the ability to make timely repairs. A federal judge later rejected Deere's attempt to dismiss that case, ruling that the company must answer government allegations for cornering the repair market. As of January 2026, enacted laws in California, Colorado, Minnesota, New York, Oregon, and Washington now require manufacturers to make parts, tools, documentation, and diagnostic software available to independent repair providers on fair and reasonable terms. And in April 2026, a settlement. Deere agreed to pay $99 million to resolve the class action, compensating farmers who had used authorized dealers for repairs since January 2018, and committing to provide digital diagnostic tools, repair manuals, and software access for a period of 10 years. Deere called it a settlement with no finding of wrongdoing. But consider what $99 million and a decade of mandatory tool access concessions look like from the outside. The FTC lawsuit remains ongoing and is currently in the discovery phase, still seeking to determine whether Deere violated antitrust law. The courtroom battle is not over, and the precedent being set in those Illinois federal courts will reach far beyond agricultural equipment. The John Deere story is not a farming story, it is a preview. The concerns are hardly limited to agricultural equipment. Computers, smartphones, thermostats, refrigerators, washers, dryers, and a range of other products have all implemented some form of electronic gatekeeping and planned obsolescence in recent years. The template is simple. Sell a physical product, embed software, attach a license agreement that transfers control of that software to the manufacturer, build a repair ecosystem that only you can access, collect the data that the product generates, sell it, charge for access to the tools required to keep the product you sold functioning. Repeat, John Deere did not invent this playbook, but they deployed it against people who feed the nation, using equipment that costs more than most homes and in conditions where a 2-day delay means a family loses its income for the year. That is what made it visible. That is what made it explosive. The tractor was just the beginning. Every connected appliance in your home, every software-controlled system in your car, every piece of smart technology you own is moving toward the same model. You will pay for it. You will not own it. You will license the right to use it on terms that can be revised without your consent. The leaping deer on the logo does not look quite the same when you understand what it was leaping toward. If this story made you think differently about who actually owns the things you buy, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more investigations like this, subscribe. We do not cover the headlines. We cover what the headlines are hiding.